that person with lived experience, they don't know everything about solving this either. They know important things. So does your evidence base. So does the practitioner who's working to help people. The health department knows things too. The hospital. So what does the work of public health become then? It becomes, how do we put the voices together in such a way that it empowers the perspectives that we need to intuit decisions that are robust to uncertainty, that sort of get it even if we can't explain it.
Welcome back to Root Notes, where we talk about the things that we're learning along the way, along this journey. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the really compelling and interesting data that's come out recently that from the work that you've been doing in opioid overdose and opioid responses in Harnett County specifically. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, last time we talked a lot about the excitement that I feel looking at the future of public health and some of the things that we're learning and doing this a little differently than the way in which maybe we were taught or the way in which public health used to be taught. But that excitement comes because things are working.
Yeah, right.
And so the data that you're talking about, so the county in which we're located, the county we live and work in, just a couple of years ago, in the top quartile in our state in terms of the number of overdose deaths as a death rate. Mm-hmm. And so overdose fatality is this deep concern. And one of the things that's been really exciting lately that I'm sure everybody's hearing, we talk about the moment and the challenges of the moment, but one of the things that's really exciting is that across the country, in most places, overdose deaths are coming down.
Right. Great news. Yeah.
Is huge. And just a few years ago, we were just hoping that was even a possibility to turn this around. And North Carolina, the state that we're in, is actually leading the country in the reduction of fentanyl positive deaths. So when you look at the challenges we've been facing and trying to deal with the scourge that is fentanyl, North Carolina is sort of leading the way in the biggest changes. But when you compare what we've been able to do in the county to the state, North Carolina, depending on how you look at the data over the past couple of years, has reduced fentanyl deaths by somewhere in the neighborhood of 36 to 40%.
It's huge.
It's huge. It's not taking anything away from that.
To be celebrated. Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing. But in this county, that same reduction is on the order of 72% reduction in fentanyl deaths in the last 2 years. The 2 years that we've been doing this strategic response in the community. And so it's just so exciting, and I'm having a lot of opportunities to talk about what we're doing because the data is bearing out that, doing the work in this way
is working.
It actually works. What do you know?
Now let's talk about what is it that's working? What is the intervention, right? What is the one thing that we're doing differently, the intervention that mattered so much here in Harnett County?
And this is the whole thing.
Okay.
This is what everybody wants to talk about.
Yeah, what's the magic bullet? Yeah.
You're right. Let me start with a story. Public health, when we're trying to introduce it to people, we talk about it in exactly the way you just did.
Right.
We do something up here and something down here changes.
Right.
We intervene, cause and effect.
Sure.
In fact, like many public health people, I don't even know the number of times I've been in a microphone on a stage in front of a group telling the story of, the story, like there's a river.
Oh, yes.
We're all gathered by the river.
Told this story, yeah.
We're all gathered by the river. Listeners, if you don't know the story, this is what we would tell. So if you want to understand public health, imagine that we're all having a picnic by the river and we're enjoying ourselves, and we look out, and there's a kid in the river that's just flailing in distress.
Right.
And so we make this human change. We snap into action. We make this human chain, and we get the kid over to the shore, and we rescue the kid from the river. And we're all celebrating, and then somebody looks and goes, wait, there's another kid. We missed one in the river. And we make that human chain, and we get the kid, and we pass the kid back. And we're all celebrating. We've saved 2 lives in 1 picnic. This is amazing. Mm-hmm. And then somebody goes, wait, there's another kid in the river. And you see me turn and run. And you go, why are you being such a coward? Like, come back. What are you doing? We need you. There's another kid in the river. And I say, as public health, what do I say?
I'm going to find out what's going on upstream to make the kids fall into the river. Yeah.
That's the story, right? I'm going upstream. I'm going to figure out who's throwing these kids into a river. I'm going to figure out what playground is very poorly designed.
That's right.
I'm going to figure out what bridge needs some attention, dumping people out. Yeah, that's our story. And,
Sure.
For whatever it's worth, it can help people sort of get the idea of what kinds of things public health can do. Because
Sure.
you explain that the story is, in the United States in particular, our healthcare system is really good at giving heroic interventions
Right.
when people are already sick or already injured. And public health is like, how can we prevent those things
Sure.
from happening? What can we do upstream? Except for every single day of doing this work in community, I'm less convinced by that story. I am. And so when
What? Okay.
and this is like a hot take in public health, right?
Right.
I just don't know if the whole upstream, downstream language is a good metaphor for what we do. And the reason is that it's just too stinking linear.
Linear.
Like the real world, it's just not an experiment. The real world is just not a study. And the real world is not, let me tweak this variable and see what effect we have. Let me do this one intervention and see what effect we have. So you asked me a question. We're getting all this very exciting data. What the work that we're doing is a strategic community level response to the overdose crisis in our community. What has been the change?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a thing. It's not one thing. We didn't do this as a research study. I can't tell you what the intervention is. What actually happened is that when the money came down because of the settlement from the attorneys general who sued companies, and I'm sure everybody knows about this, but sued companies that were responsible for phase 1 of the opioid crisis. The money came down in our state, in North Carolina. The majority of the funds went directly to local governments.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
To figure out what to do with. And so as the public health chair of the local academic public health program, I got a phone call. Said, hey, could you help us figure out what to do with these monies? And so I attended a very small meeting of folks to talk about what to do with these millions of dollars that would be coming into the county to try to deal with this very wicked problem.
Right.
And everybody around the table was offering, like, I think this is the intervention.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's the
And
plan.
unfortunately, it was one of those round robin meetings where you like, all right, let's start at this end of the table and go around.
Let me guess, you were last.
And I was next to last.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, this hour-long meeting, we're like 50 minutes into this meeting
Right.
before I say my name.
Yeah.
I knew a bunch of the people around the table, but it got to me. And the whole time I'm listening to people giving very good ideas
Sure.
about interventions that could be done, treatment program. I mean, just like completely legit stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
The whole time I'm thinking, like, what we really need to do is a strategy. Like, we need to have a community process to figure out what we need, where we need it, to figure out who can be a part of it, and then to articulate it in a way that is guiding vision to try to deal with a very complex problem. But I've just heard all these other people offering very clear solutions. And it gets to me and I go, look, I don't even know if anybody's going to want to hear this at this point, but I think what we should do with the money is not spend the money yet. That's not a winning solution.
No.
Like, nobody wants to hear that.
Well, and to be fair, you're talking about, in the throes of the crisis, right? So we're talking about people around the table
dying.
who know people who have died. They have lost people. So this isn't just a theoretical conversation about program design and implementation and evidence-based interventions. You're talking about people who are invested in this because they've lost folks.
That's right.
And so they're passionate.
People who are doing treatment with people who have substance use disorders, they're seeing how that devastates lives. I mean,
right.
Right.
And you suggest that we...
And I go, I think we should take a beat. And it really was like a record scratch moment. Like everybody's on it's just like, this very good idea. Or should we do this very good idea? And it gets to me and I'm just like, I think what we should do is host a series of conversations with the community at the same time that we're doing assessment. And we could leverage, graduate students to do this, to better understand where we are situated relative to comprehensive supports for our community, and then create a strategic plan. And then at the end of an 18-month process, start spending and investing in solutions. And I think I turned the room with this, and I totally believe this too. It's easy to spend money on things, especially wicked problems. Finding something to spend money on is easy.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So you could burn cash.
Right.
Can you invest in solutions? And I said, if we want to just burn cash, then there are like really reasonable ways to do it. But we don't really know. I said, but if we want to invest in solutions, we're going to have to think about it together. We can't, not one of us can think about it. We're going to have to invite a lot more people to the table, and we're going to have to think about it.
Now, that's not the way you would typically approach this sort of thing historically. We would say, what are the evidence-based solutions that we can afford, that would be implementable here? We would be having conversations about positioning those ideas.
Pick some evidence-based solutions and fire away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, this story has this really, it's a really hopeful story, and that we've seen this real progress because of the courage of a few county leaders.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So imagine that you're county leadership at this point, and you've been entrusted with these funds, and you're in the middle of a crisis.
Yeah.
Like the word crisis is doing a lot of work here. Like we're in the middle of a crisis. It's on the paper in front of you, yes. The people know it's a crisis.
Right.
The people know that you're about to receive funds that could be invested.
Yeah. There are parents lining up at commissioners' meetings, at boards meetings, to talk about, what are you doing about this, my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife.
I'm not an elected official. I don't work for elected officials. I'm sitting here as the academic guy saying, if we really want to do this the right way, we're going to have to build a bigger table, and we're going to have to invite a lot of people, and it's going to take a lot of listening and a lot of planning for us to do this. And those folks had the foresight and the courage to go, you know what? Let's do them. Let's figure out what we need. Let's listen to more folks. Let's invite more folks to the table. As a result of that, courage, really, and foresight, we got a lot done. And we barely gotten started in the grand scheme of things. Like, we laid this plan out to 2030.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a 72% reduction
It's fantastic.
in the first 2 years of implementation.
Yeah.
I would never have dreamed it.
So now let's be clear. It's not without its bumps. Courage means there's risk, right?
Yeah,
it's
been challenging.
Folks had to be willing to take the heat.
Yeah.
And the pushback to execute this sort of vision. And it's not common, right? It's hard to explain to constituents and residents that we're taking this approach that feels nonlinear.
Yeah, and it is nonlinear. And this is the thing. So there's so much of this conversation that's not new. Mm-hmm. Not all that outside the box of what public health has always been.
Right.
And then there's these little pieces that change everything. Mm-hmm. And so, what's not new? Yeah, like assessment, sure, right?
Yeah.
Like community meetings, absolutely. That's only been for decades now that we've been suggesting this. See what's different. The difference is that rather than going, you know what, here's evidence-based practice. Let me pick that up. Figure out how to shave off an edge or two to be able to force that into our context and implement and see if we get the same results that they got. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the linear approach.
Yeah, it is.
Right? Instead, we do all that assessment work, and at the end of it, instead of just grabbing evidence-based practice, we go like, okay, how do we adapt all that we know about the problem to create a custom fit solution for the community? That is as elegant and as simple as it sounds, and incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And my friends, Gary Gunderson and his wife, TC, they talk about this as we've got to abandon the upstream, downstream language and start recognizing that the cultivation of health is more like a watershed.
Oh.
Right? That's
a beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah. And so when you say like, how are we getting this data in the county?
Yeah.
Well, it includes things like having pastor summits, faith leader summits, where we have representatives from the local mosque and lots of representatives from Christian churches sitting down and talking together about what it is they could do in their faith communities, what their faith communities are ready to do, and asking deep questions about their role in this. And it also is rolling out a gel-based MOUD program, where all of a sudden you have people who are very at risk of overdose, entering a path to treatment out of an arrest, out of jail. That might seem obvious to some listeners. Let me help you.
It's not.
You back up. What did you do when you had people with substance use issues that were coming into jail? You did nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to, people were doing the best they could and people were trying to make hard decisions. But the truth is that people would come in with substance use and they would have inhumane withdrawals in jail.
Right.
And then be released. And like most people also don't understand, most people are released from jail pretty soon. Most people are, some horrible cases of people sitting in a jail cell waiting for a trial forever. But most people we're talking days,
right? Maybe
weeks, and they're back. And then what happens?
Oh, yeah, relapse.
Or their risk of an overdose
skyrockets
immediately after. You're talking like 20, 30, depending on the study that you read, 20 or 30 times.
Wow.
Right. So gel-based MOUD program. Well, how do you do that? Well, it starts with we, being the county, hires a behavioral health clinical specialist to work for the sheriff's department. So now, amongst the deputies that work for the sheriff's office, there's also this clinical social worker that works on reentry.
Wow.
Building relations.
That's huge.
Yeah, we're on like 0.2 of all of the things that were happening. It's everything all at once, like whatever that show is. That's what it looks like, not linear. Not like what is the one change.
Yeah, so in sort of the backing out into sort of the meta approach of this, nonlinear thinking is not that common in public health, right? So how do we sort of reshape nonlinear thinking and apply it to these complex problems of opioid overdose, of vaccine hesitancy, of chronic disease prevention, all of those things? If this works in this case, the approach, the thinking, the reframing, how do we then translate it?
So I think there's I'd like to sort of bifurcate the conversation. Like, well, let's have a little crossroads, and there are two different ways to develop.
Well, this is root notes, so we can definitely do that.
Oh my! On the one hand, you and I are actually. I think a lot of people are surprised who know us in these kind of conversations. We're actually quant guys.
Oh yeah,
like you literally teach and have taught for way more, maybe 2 decades at this point.
I mean, close
stats.
to it. Yeah, biostatistics. Yeah,
you
absolutely.
Teach stats.
Sure. Yeah.
My dissertation was a structural equation model.
Yeah.
It does not get geekier than that.
No, that's true.
Like big number. That's where we're coming from. And so part of when we started looking at like the chaos theory and complexity and this burgeoning technology.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember.
You and I got very excited about that and started working on like, can we use AI to solve some modeling problems so that we could start dealing with complexity in models? And there are people doing very exciting work in this arena in public health, and I hope that we continue to have breakthroughs there.
Yeah, we were very excited about this idea of strange attractors being able to dig down into
it. We like deal with what kind of
we get very
patterns
excited
might be in the
about
data,
a lot.
And calling into question some of the things that we think we know that might actually, if you zoom out far enough in the complexity of all the variables, might have been very like might have explanations that have more to do with just rises and falls in big macro systems, right? So you and I were like very much into that. And thinking, and I still think there's promise out there. I heard Bill Gates talking about not just AI, but super AI, like these like next evolution, like stage theory kind of evolution,
right?
Like next big shift to maybe these systems can solve the problems that we've never been able to figure out, right? But I know this: we are not there.
Yeah, no, we're not.
I know this. We could not use those systems to figure out how to invest settlement funds in this county. And so the question became, but it doesn't change the fact. But I think here's what we retreat to. We know, I think all public health people know, like we can't model that.
Right.
So we retreat to linear.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Is there an alternative? And that's what we begin to play with. Like, is there an alternative to retreating to linear? What would it look like? Well, maybe we can intuit complexity through very complex, what in the geekiness of it, we would call a knowledge network, where you take explicit knowledge that comes from people like me and you, the health department, healthcare providers, and tacit knowledge from people with lived experience. People who are faith leaders, been in the community for 60 years. People who have recently had substance use problems. People who've lost their children to substance use. People, like, there's a lot of knowing that happens.
Yeah.
In that. How can we bring all that to bear so that we're making decisions where we're appreciating the complexity without getting confused? And sometimes when I talk about that, people are like, what do you mean? Like, give me an example. It's like this. You put a decision-making group around the table to talk about how we're going to, like, which programs we're going to invest in. And you have a pastor that's been in the community longer than I've been alive.
Yeah.
That goes, I don't know if I'd do it like that. And you listen.
And you listen. That's right.
You go, like, he might not even be able to explain why, but that hesitation, or the person with lived experience that's, has been in recovery for 2 years, very fresh experience of substance use disorder in your community, and goes, I don't think that's going to work. Listen. I don't care if they figured out, through 500 trials in Baltimore at Hopkins and in Boston at Harvard that this was an quote-unquote evidence-based practice. If that person with lived experience in your community goes, I don't know if I'd do it like that.
You better pay attention. Yeah. It's born out of, as you say, the tacit knowledge that they may not be able to articulate, but it's also rooted in their lived experience and then sort of their sort of perspective and moral framework that they're operating from that is sort of pushing and tweaking the way in which they approach the world. And because they have that connection to the community, they know whether or not this is going to be effective or not.
And there's no source of knowledge. Like sometimes people get like, there's no one source of knowledge that can handle complexity.
Oh,
that's a big part of it too, right?
Yeah, right.
So that person with lived experience, they don't know everything about solving this either.
Right.
They know important things. So does your evidence base. So does the practitioner who's working to help people, who's prescribing Suboxone and is working with real patients. They know things too. The health department knows things too. The hospital, so what does the work of public health become then? It becomes, how do we put the voices together in such a way that it empowers the perspectives that we need to intuit decisions that are robust to uncertainty, that sort of get it even if we can't explain it.
And that's the tacit knowledge networks that you're sort of describing. Yeah. And even now, as we're talking about nonlinear approaches, in the back of my mind, I'm sort of sketching out diagrams of these knowledge networks, right? Of how I could render this and then sort of look at pathways and measure them. It's still there, right? That knee-jerk approach to want to measure it in some way.
Right. And I think you used the term when we were discussing this before, I think, with some group or something, you're like, we have this tendency to, our expertise pushes us sometimes to be reductive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're
like, what can we reduce to? Like, what's the model? What's the most parsimonious way that we can do? I mean, it's the science.
I mean, I'm literally teaching students how to use AI tools, how to use stats packages, how to analyze data down to the variable and the strength of the variable and the statistical significance. We're reducing things to p-values all the time.
Absolutely. And so is what we're saying making all that moot? It is definitely not. What it's saying is, like, how does that exist as a part of an ecosystem of knowing, right? It's not that this isn't valuable. It's like that science has evolved. Like a lot of humans have worked together to figure this out.
Sure.
It's valuable. And so is the lived experience of being a pastor in this community for 60 years.
Yeah.
Like, we got to figure out a way to balance all of that and appreciate the fact that having this doesn't mean you understand this. And you may never understand that. Right?
But, we want to understand. We seek to understand. We will always try to understand. But at the end of the day, you don't have to understand.
That's the thing,
to be able to rely on
that is
the tacit knowledge and the wisdom and the experience that the community has.
Right. So if you want to deal with complexity in the kind of way that we're talking about here, and the way that's sort of been borne out in these projects, project's not even a big enough word for it.
Right.
This work that we're doing to cultivate health in our community. If you want to do it differently, you got to let go of the idea that you're ever going to have all of this knowledge and instead trust other people's knowing.
Wow.
You don't have to explain this to me for me to value that you know what you're talking about.
That is so counter to the way we consider ourselves, our profession, right? Like we talk about experts and expertise. And so to then look at the community around you as the peers in the expertise is a complete reframing of...
Peer's a nice language for that.
Yeah, I think that...
the spiritual knowledge is peer to the mainstream knowledge. It's peer to the scientific knowledge. And I think... So here's an example. So all of this is like rainbows and unicorns, right? It's all beautiful.
Yeah, sure.
Until you start trying to do it. And the way in which, for instance, in overdose prevention work, the way this shows up is people have very specific ways of thinking about what the right approach is.
The right approach.
The right approach.
Yeah.
And I mean, and there's reason for it. And people will tell you in public health that I love and appreciate and deeply respect, 12-step programs, for instance,
Right.
are problematic. They don't have an evidence base. We need to direct our attention towards things like medication for opioid use disorder. Our approach in this work, working through the complexity that is this community, is to try our best to resist those kind of sort of total dismissals of pathways. The reality is, it's indisputable that some people are helped with 12-step programs. I know them. I can tell you who they are in this community. It's also indisputable that the evidence points towards using medication for opioid use disorder. So people who are all about abstinence and people who say, no, we need to increase access to Suboxone, the question can become like, can these things be peer understandings? Can we, instead of saying it has to be either or, can we build systems that are both and?
I think that's a great point. I think, you said the right approach. It's more about the right mix, right? It's about the both and, but in terms of solutions that may or may not have stronger or strongest evidence base. It's about what's the right mix for us as a community.
It's about that, and it's also about bringing people together around the things that they can get excited about, right? Like, this is the destination we want to get to. This is what our vision for a community is. So one of the things, if you look at the work that we've done collectively in the community, we call it Solve Harnett. Harnett is the county that we're in. Solve. Partly because that is our orientation, that this is a solvable problem, which looks a lot more true today than it did when we were trying to say that 3 years ago. Yeah, that was
optimistic.
Right.
At best. Yeah.
It felt cute then.
Right.
It looks real now. Looks like a solvable problem. So, okay, solved. What did that end up being? That ended up being commitments in 5 directions. Stigma is reduced in all the work that we do. Ownership is shared. This is not a person or a agency's thing. This is not an organization's thing. This is our thing. Who's accountable to it? All of us. The L is for this thing continues to evolve. It's wicked. That means we're going to have to learn continuously. V stood for values. That we are going to root this work in the values of our community, including getting faith leaders to the table early and often in the design of this work and the implementation of it. And then E stood for equity. That we're not going to leave anybody out. And we're going to do the deep dive in the data to understand who might not be benefiting in the ways that maybe the big numbers are showing. Those were the commitments. How do we get there? Oh, there are lots of pathways.
Sure.
And we want to empower as many pathways as possible. That's where you go, oh, we're dealing with complexity, but we're not confused.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I talk to students about this sort of thing in class, when we're discussing interventions and evidence base, we teach students that there's a linear process for doing the quality of life assessment, and then we build interventions that are evidence-based, and we do process evaluation for implementation and all these sorts of things, and we measure it, and then we're done, right? I mean, because the thing you just said that I think is important to emphasize is continuous conversation.
Yeah.
That means that you are not looking at specific points in time and measuring very finite things. You are talking about how we are experiencing this now at every turn and making decisions that might mean we change direction.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, it has to, right? Because the thing you're not going to do with complexity is think you've got it figured out.
Yeah.
right? So everything you're saying is so crucial. Like rejecting the linear assumptions means all this stuff that we've been talking about. And it means that this is going to continuously be the work.
Yeah.
Of going, okay, oh, that shifted. Oh, we created an unintended consequence here. Better remedy that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's what makes it complex.
But there is still the important work of being able to measure, being able to recognize, having some sort of foreseeability, 100%. Right?
Yeah.
So it is both and. It is still that.
Right.
The skills, that the expertise that we historically could bring to that are all relevant. We just kind of need them all the time instead of just every once in a while.
Well, it's about, like, if you zoom in close enough into a very complex system, there can be some things that look very linear. Mm-hmm. And it's just being wise enough to zoom out.
Well, it's a circuit board, right?
You can work some things according to our previous logic.
Yeah.
But you can't solve wicked problems. And that's an important distinction to make. Like, what we're talking about is it's a type of problem in the community.
That's a good point.
Right. Like, these are wicked problems that I'm interested in working on. If it's a technical problem, the clearest way to handle that is not what I'm describing.
Sure. Yeah. And some problems are technical problems. Yes.
Like, they have a textbook answer. Do the textbook answer.
But humans,
that's the way to do it.
But humans are complex. We create complex systems. We have complex problems. It's like looking, if you zoom in to a plate of spaghetti and you're looking at one very specific part, it may look like a noodle, a line, a specific path. And then when you zoom back out, oh, this is a mess, right? Like, this is
your metaphor is always food.
I'm hungry. It's dinner time. Yeah, no, I think
I see what you're reading.
Yeah, I think, but that's a good point. Mm-hmm. When we zoom in, and we do that, the reductionist way in which we approach problems, because we have this sort of post-positivist like mindset of, we can measure, we can understand, we can, and then we can apply, quantitative reasoning to understand the problem and address the problem. It's so ingrained in us. Mm-hmm. I mean, you hear leaders all the time, I want solutions, right? I want to know how to fix the problem. I want the thing. And it's not that easy. Not
with these kind of problems.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that you can figure out as an engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
And they can be very complicated.
Sure.
It's not complexity.
Yeah.
Not what we're talking about. And in fact, complexity theory, like chaos theory, has been even more successful, I think, as a way for people to model things that are very complicated, but compared to community health, kind of simple.
Well,
and I mean, so that's what you got to recognize. Are we talking about wicked problems in the complexity that is community? If that's what we're talking about, then you've got to let go of the idea that you're going to engineer solutions.
Well, you can't engineer a solution, because as you try to intervene, as you try to assess, the very act of assessing is changing the reality of the problem or the issue, right? And so if it is constantly being changed by every action we take, then there is no specific plan that we can implement, execute, and expect a predicted outcome. It's just not going to happen.
Well, here's it's even more than that, I think. And this is what makes some of my, God love them, my public health colleagues, their heads spin. Not only is what you said true, but I also need you at every stage as the community, this very broad, complex knowledge network, to tell me what the outcome should be, to tell me what the goal is. And we can't say it and then leave it.
Yeah, it's going to evolve.
That L in solve is for learning is continuous, including, like, what is health in this moment? What is the thing that we want to, what is the primary motivating factor right now? And if that seems like esoteric, sit down with folks. Sit down with folks in this moment and ask them what's important about health in our country. You're going to get a whole bunch of answers without having to ask too many people. And what that means is that we got to continuously check in with that complex knowledge network and figure out what we're working on.
That's a good point. I don't know that most people have thought about it this way, and it's a shift in my thinking, certainly in more recent years. Historically, like you said, very quantitative approach to things, very linear. It's how we were taught, tends to be how I'm wired in general. And so, if you were to suggest to our listeners, to colleagues, to anyone who wants to understand this better, what should they first engage with? What book, what resource would you say helps to shape this understanding in a way that is accessible?
That's a great question. So it depends on how geeky you are and how much you want to delve into the history of some of the science of this. James Gleick wrote a book back in, I think it was the 90s, talking about this crazy new science called chaos.
Yeah.
And it's still a very interesting read to sort of get a sense of the history of this and what was exciting about this a few decades ago. It's also a reminder that this is something that we should have been responding to before now in ways that we haven't. Yeah. I'm not saying nobody has. I'm not saying that people aren't doing work that's completely. I'm saying that the mainstream of our work, when we go in to do strategic planning with health departments, when we go work with, not just in health, by the way, we work with organizations doing all kinds of things. It is not informed by this kind of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to get real geeky, I would start there and then read the folks that were citing that. But if you just want to conceptually start moving in a real helpful direction, ask yourself, whose way of knowing is shaping these decisions? Mm-hmm. And then ask yourself, are there alternate ways of knowing that we might learn from? Mm-hmm. That question by itself will help you see where you are operating from linear thinking when you're being reductionist and not embracing complexity.
That's really good advice. I think the thing that, from a systems perspective, that we struggle with, and certainly in the academy and certainly in the practice of public health, is that what is rewarded is the thing that I can measure and prove, or at least give you evidence to support. And so I don't know what your thoughts are, and I don't really know that there's a great answer to this question, but how do we sort of incentivize our institutions, our structures, to move away from that, let me reward the linear approach, because I can give you data on it, right? I can give you the endpoint. How do we do that?
Well, so a couple of things. One, I'm not letting go of data. We started this conversation talking about how excited I am about data.
Yeah.
Right? It's just we got to treat the data differently in the process, right? And we've got to also allow more people to have a say about what we're counting and what counts. There's some really groundbreaking work, as you were talking about, like people you could read. There's this guy named Robert Chambers who just did extraordinary work in developing countries, low-income countries, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Wrote just a series of books that we still need to learn from. And one of those books is Whose Reality Counts? That's all I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Whose reality counts? So on the one hand, it's like data matters.
Sure.
But let's make sure that we're counting the things that count. And a lot of people get a say in that. And I think it's about having the humility to do that. The other thing that I want to say, and it's going to feel very different than that, is I am really excited, as I know you are, about technology and what we can get done that we used to have to spend time doing, but we can get done a lot faster now.
Yeah.
With things like large language models and AI, which gives us the opportunity to, if I can get that stuff that we used to do done faster, well, what are you doing with your time? Well, it gives us the opportunity, maybe for the first time in our kind of work, to go, I need to go hear from a lot more people. And so I think, you know, as far as like, how do we retool things? I think we start by saying, okay, we're still going to count things, but we're going to have more people have a say in what counts. And then it's about everything from grants to the way in which you, as a manager, allocate people's times and their expectations and what their performance indicators are. How much of it is relationship building? Like, we should have grants that are funding work that is primarily relationship building.
Well, and
like
that's
doing that work.
And
that should count as work.
And that's exactly what I was getting at in terms of how do we retool and refocus our institutions. But because historically we're rewarding the more finite approaches. And so I think that's good advice, right? We're gonna incentivize you not to a specific percentage and objective and a KPI that goes into your annual review. We're going to be more qualitative and sort of, expand the way in which we measure your impact.
Yeah. And maybe there's still things that we need to count in terms of, I'm still a data guy at some level, like a numbers guy. And maybe it's, instead of counting some of the things we counted in the past, like, all right, this coalition that we need to have around this, challenge, this complex problem in our community. People in our kind of work lead a lot of those coalitions. Maybe in addition to you leading that coalition, use AI, allow that to save time on all these other tasks, and have one-on-ones with everybody in that coalition. Schedule that. I want you to spend time doing one-on-ones with everybody in the coalition.
Sure.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
That'd be amazing.
How would that transform the work?
Yeah.
See, I think there are transformational things we could do that can be operationalized. It doesn't have to be loose and just confusing and nebulous. Okay, if we're going to have a coalition, make sure you have a solid relationship with everybody on that coalition.
Yeah. I think that's a great point.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts on this? Complexity is not confusion.
Complexity doesn't have to be confusion. I think the last thing I would say about it is one of the reasons we shy away from this kind of thing is that we do get overwhelmed by it. But it is reality.
Yeah.
When you reduce it to something that you're not being overwhelmed by, that thing that you're working on now is fiction. Right? So rather than us playing around in some fictional world where we're only worried about these three variables that we can keep in our head at the same time and that we think we can fully understand, let's just deal with reality. Let's deal with reality on its terms. Deal with our communities where they're at. Deal with complex problems that I can't have all the answers to, so I'm going to need a lot of people around the table. And let's get good at the skills that go, okay, this is the reality. What can we do about it?
Yeah. Great final word.
All right, I get to ask you this time.
Okay.
So, detour worth taking for you. We talked about all this heavy, complex stuff. What's a detour that folks could consider taking?
Yeah. So, it's on Netflix now as a limited series. It's called The Three Body Problem. It's based on a science fiction book, which is fascinating, and the book is like anything, always
sci-fi guy.
Yeah, I love sci-fi. So the book is always better than the movie or the series, but both are good. And it's interesting and related to chaos theory, because the three body problem, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it's immersed in this universe where there are three solar bodies. And because of that, the orbits of the planets are completely unpredictable. And what that means for
actually, this is so funny. Glick talks about this in Chaos.
Really?
That book that I referenced. Yeah.
Yeah?
He talks about the three-body problem as a physics thing.
Right, and it is a physics thing, right.
So so that's actually a part of this?
It's a major part of this, because with the three solar bodies and the unpredictable orbits of the planets, that means that, there's hot and cold extremes, there's weather that is unpredictable. And so the development and evolution of life on those planets, it gets wiped out and restarts constantly. Yeah. And so there are periods of stability that might last a year or 1,000 years or 100,000 years. And so the alien life forms that develop on this planet have to figure out a way to sort of navigate that complexity. And I won't give anything away in terms of the solutions, but it's pretty good, pretty entertaining. So I'd highly recommend anyone who wants to immerse themselves in some great science fiction and think about this sort of stuff.
So what is it like as a show? Is it like...
it's an interesting show, but
like sort of action adventure.
It's sci-fi. A little bit of romance is always in there. A little bit of intrigue. So it's got a little bit of everything. Okay. Yeah. I'd highly recommend
the
Three Body Problem
on Netflix.
On Netflix is great, or you could read the book. The series is fantastic, and you end up going down the rabbit hole of the entire book series. I promise. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. I'm gonna have to check that out. I don't usually watch the stuff you watch, but
we're watching different stuff. All righty.
So Wes, before we go, what's up the road?
What's up the road next is pretty exciting. It's going to be our first guest on the podcast, and we'll have a fun conversation and an interview, and it will be a fun, engaging time. So I would highly recommend you guys join us again for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to bringing in other voices to talk about all this good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. See you down the road.
See ya.